Like many developments in politics, it would be better if we didn't have to start from here. But here is where we are. As Marx said, people make their own history, but not in circumstances of their own choosing. So we have to deal with the situation as it is, as opposed to a kind of idealised version of reality. The collapse of the Communist parties after 1991 and the shift to the right, or moves to the right, by social democratic parties right across Europe means that we now have reformist parties incapable of making reforms. Indeed, the very word itself has been turned on its head. So you've got Tory reforms of the NHS, Tory reforms of education or whatever. So the dismantling of what's left of the welfare state is being called a reform. This has been and the introduction of neoliberalism across the particularly after 1991, after the collapse of communism. This crisis of capitalism was exacerbated by the economic crisis of 2007 and 8, the imposition of austerity, making ordinary people pay for the mess the bankers left us with. So we have a crisis of capitalism on the one hand, but also a crisis of the environment, which the current government, and I think the Labour Party, if they got into government, are basically ignoring, except to try and develop a kind of green capitalism. So, for example, the development of palm oil, growing of palm oil for biofuels, which is turning whole areas of the world into deserts with no wildlife left. So a big space opened up as a result of this between social democratic parties, the Labour Party in Britain, PASOK in Greece, the PS in France, and the revolutionary left. At the same time, there has been a parallel growth of a kind of anti-party ideology amongst young people, leading to alternative, direct action, often anti-capitalist, but never explicitly socialist responses to the crisis. And this has been going on actually a long time. I mean, I put Occupy first and then the Indignados in Spain, but actually Reclaim the Streets was doing it 15, 20 years ago, and it's the same process, a rejection of parties, to be replaced by direct action. And this is hardly surprising if we think of where social democracy is, in that it refuses to question the neoliberal capitalist consensus. And at the same time, certainly in Britain and probably elsewhere in Europe, trade unions are in a real retreat. In Britain, they're half the size they were 30 years ago. And where young people in particular are in work, they're in temporary part-time jobs, so-called the precarious workforce, and probably don't come across a trade union in their workplace unless they're working in the public sector, where the trade unions are still slightly stronger. Meanwhile, ideas of socialism, let alone a revolution, have been completely marginalised, while we have the growth at the same time of far-right groups, most notably Golden Dawn in Greece, but also UKIP in Britain. So it raises the question of how to organise, or the need to organise and how to do it, a party to the left of Labour, a broad party, but on the left. Now, different European countries have had different experiences of this. For the development of Syriza in Greece, De Linke in Germany, the Left Bloc in Portugal, the Red Green Alliance in Denmark, and Rifondazione in Italy, and the Front de Gauche in France. Some have been more successful than others. The most obviously successful is that of Syriza, but then the crisis in Greece is much deeper than anywhere else in Europe, I would argue. And although they have their specificities, they're not all identical. They are all a response to try and build something to the left of reformism because of this gap opening up. And in most of them, I suspect probably in all of them, the small revolutionary groups are also involved. Now, the FI group in Greece is in fact in Antalya rather than being in Syriza, and I think most of the people in socialism are quite critical of that. We think they should be in Syriza for all sorts of reasons. In Britain, or at least in England and Scotland at least, we have had various attempts at new left alternatives, from the SLP, which Scargill ran, and probably still does run, the Socialist Alliance, which was a kind of coalition of left groups plus various individuals, and then Respect, basically organised and run by Galloway. But all of these have founded on a series of real problems that we have to understand in order not to repeat them. There was a lack of democracy and transparency in all these groups. You have the sectarianism of some of the left groups, building their own organisation at the cost of building the broad project. Manoeuvres on one or more components of any coalition. And in addition, particularly with Galloway, maverick and unaccountable leaders, which makes it very difficult to build anything worth having. So it's a central question today for revolutionaries and anti-capitalist groups. Should we be part of a broad left party? And if so, what is the relation between reform and revolution? Now, in Socialist Resistance, we've been arguing for a decade or more that the political space exists for the development of a broad left party, but that this party cannot be revolutionary at this time. Certainly revolutionaries and anti-capitalists should be in it, and as I say, we are critical about our comrades in Greece in that they've not joined Syriza. So in Britain we have today the development of left unity, and we have to ask ourselves, should we be part of it, and if so, why should we be part of it? Well, there are a series of reasons, and no doubt more will come out in the discussion. But the first one is that the large majority of the population in Britain is looking for answers to the austerity being imposed on them and across Europe, but are not at all convinced of the need to overthrow the system, even though they're critical of the rightward moves of the Labour Party. So we have a responsibility to try and build a party which can oppose the deadly austerity of the coalition government, which will almost certainly continue if the Labour Party managed to get into government in, whenever it is, 2015, the next election. We should be in it also because if we're part of it, we can influence its development. We can be organised as platforms, so we don't need to hide our politics, but with individual membership and a thoroughgoing democracy and transparency within the new party, no one group will be able to dominate it, as they have done in past attempts at building a left party. So no more decisions made somewhere else and then imposed on which we've experienced several times over in the attempt to build such a party. So I think we can build a party which, in its day-to-day practice, can pose an alternative to the barbarisms of capitalism today.
Thank you very much.
People in this room recognise the importance of continuing to organise as revolutionaries, and which is why Socialist Resistance and the other two groups, the ACI and the ISN, are interested in getting together and trying to form a bigger revolutionary organisation so we can have more impact rather than less. And I certainly didn't say that I was giving up on being revolutionary. I've been a revolutionary for a long time, and I'm not going to stop now at the age of 70 suddenly deciding I'm not a revolutionary anymore. But the idea that all of the things that have happened around left parties in the past, that somebody said, have been a complete disaster, is a very bizarre view of history, actually, because things don't happen like that. They don't turn into everything turns into a disaster. There's a process going on, and it's been going on for maybe 20 years if we go back to the formation of the PT. And the process and the history of what happens to these groups and why things go wrong is something you learn from and try not to repeat. But the idea that we can suddenly become a revolutionary, organise a revolutionary party in Britain at the present time that operates on its own in the class struggle to win people to revolution is, it's just idealism, actually. That's what I would call it. I think Simon's phrase, the class struggle party, is actually a good one for what we're trying to do in left unity. And I agree with Richard, or whoever it was, that said that left unity should be based on campaigning. I agree with that. On organising in the trade unions, in the communities, on demonstrations, and in elections. And through that process, we will win people to a more left-wing version of what is necessary. But we don't want to drive them out before we've had that experience with them. I mean, why would that be? That'd be mad. So it's true, I think, that several people have suggested that our practice is reformist as revolutionaries, but there is a difference in that we have a strategic view of what we're doing and why we're choosing to work in these broad left parties at the present time and not staying simply as pure revolutionaries. So it's necessary to remain organised, but it's to do something that's very important and that we have to get together and do.